Hello everyone. So technology has brought us a lot of great tools for making us better deer hunters, as well as making hunting more enjoyable for us. Everything from range finders to action cams so we can self-film our hunts, and of course the ever popular game cameras. These have been a great tool and are definitely enjoyable to use when you're scouting, seeing what's out there. It's great to get the pictures and videos from these. Something I don't hear a lot of talk about these days anymore are deer tracks. And I wonder if a lot of people have forgotten all the information that you can gather from deer tracks. Some of this is because game cameras can give you that information a little more accurately, but a game camera's information is only as good as where you place it. So I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you a story. Probably the first time I ever really started looking at deer tracks more in-depthly. And this goes way, way back when I knew nothing about deer hunting. Yeah, I had not even shot my first deer at this point. I was hunting in a stand of long needle pines up in Ocala, and it butted up against an area of short needle pines that had a lot of underbrush on it. There was a jeep trail that divided this area that I walked out on just to get to my stand. After a couple of hunts of seeing absolutely nothing, on an evening hunt, as I walked that jeep trail out, I went and stepped on every deer track that crossed that trail out of the scrub brush. I hunted that evening, saw nothing of course, and on my walk back out, found no new deer tracks. The next morning, on my walk out to my stand, still in darkness, there were numerous deer tracks. Once again, I covered up every one of these deer tracks because I wanted to be sure I would see what new deer tracks were made after that. I hunted that morning, got out of my stand, and as I walked back in, there was like only one deer had crossed there. There was only one area. So one deer was left out in that area before first light. So that told me, as probably you've already realized, the deer were only using that area of the forest under the cover of darkness. They weren't coming out there at all during any of the daylight hours, which is shooting times. Now, this particular thing of covering up deer tracks and looking for new ones, it's something I still use to this day on almost all my hunts. If I have an area, a patch of sand that shows a lot of, a fair amount of activity, it's a spot where they're always crossing, I'll step over those deer tracks just to cover up the old ones. And between my hunts as I go in and out, see what new deer activity is going through there. This tells you a lot. You could find a good area and just happen that you busted all the deer out of there. You want to know if they've just left the area. Most of the places I hunt, I can only see 40, 50, maybe 60 yards at most. So I can have deer moving around me, but none of them actually coming in front of me or within view. So this is a good way to know that the deer are still actively around you. It's just bad luck they haven't crossed in front of you. And you know to stick with it, be patient, stay in that stand. You can also get a little more information out of these deer tracks, particularly in the morning hunts. Now, hunting in Florida, and particularly on very foggy mornings, the condensation forms on the trees and it's always dripping off. It's good to take note of when the fog burns off. Sometimes it burns off very early, sometimes it stays around quite a long time. And this is a good point to just note it on your watch. It's about 8:30 before the fog burned off, 9 o'clock. Sometimes it sounds like it's raining in the forest. There's so much dew dripping off the trees from this. On your way back out, you can look at any new deer tracks, and if you see water droplets in them, you know those tracks were made before the fog burned off because they were still collecting the water droplets. But if you have tracks with absolutely no droplets in them, you know that track was made after the fog burned off. You know it was a late morning deer passing through there. So you can really get some good information on just the time of morning when those deer went through an area. Now, deer tracks are also very important when you're just trying to find that area to scout. And they're going to help you zero in on some good deer activity, as well as good areas to place your cameras to get even more, accurate information on the deer in that area. As good as game cameras are, if you put them in an area with low deer concentrations, not a lot of activity, it will tell you within a lot of detail that very few deer are moving in the area. But you got to remember, if you leave your camera out there for 2 weeks and you find out no deer are there, you're really not anywhere further off. So you want to find an area of good deer activity to start with. Now, tracks can help you a lot with this, but whenever I'm planning a scouting day, that I know I'm going up to the woods ahead of time, I like to pay attention to when the last time it rained was. And this can be very useful. An example of this would be if you go out scouting and you come across an area and it's littered with tracks. There's tons of tracks out there, but it's been 3 weeks since it's rained. You got to divide those tracks up over that 3-week period. Now, with that being said, you may think of going out just after it rains. One day after it rains may give you the best information. And this is somewhat true, but you can be misled on some of this. An example of this would be you go out to an area and you see no deer tracks and you're like, well, it rained yesterday. There's no deer tracks. There's no deer in this area. Well, that may have been the day in which deer don't pass by there. The next 3 days after you scouted that area, the deer may walk by there every day. The same goes if you go right after it rains and you see some deer tracks. Over the next 2 or 3 days, no deer may pass through there. You may have gone through there the one day that the deer did right after it rained to make those tracks. So what I like to, my optimal time to scout is usually about 3 or 4 days after it's rained. And the reason for this is most of us are weekend hunters. We get that Friday, Saturday, Sunday hunt in. So you want to find an area where in that weekend of hunting time, you're going to be able to see some deer. So that 3 or 4 day window is a good window to work with. So when you go out scouting and it's been 3 or 4 days since the last rain, that's about roughly the number of deer you would possibly see if you were out hunting in that spot. All this is to remember that the deer could still be moving through there at night, but you take this information and this is where you can set up your camera. Now, if on your camera all you got is nighttime pictures, what you want to look at there is which way they were going and at what time of the evening. And that's going to tell you where they're coming from as a bedding area and where they're going to for their daylight hours. And then from there, you're just going to find those deer runs and follow that back in there. So this is how I take my approach to scouting. So there's one other thing that's a real useful tool to use, and it's not really tracks necessarily, but I'd like to call it deer traffic. So as deer walk through an area, and if it's a heavily used deer run, they're going to leave very clear signs to you that they're actively using that particular deer run in a heavy amount. And I took some videos to give you guys an idea of what to look for, how to follow some of these deer runs back through the thick areas. And I will follow them literally for a mile and zigzag through these thick areas of woods till I come across that nice opening in which I can hunt them, and I have that 30 or 40 yard opening to hunt them on. So I'll hop on the computer here and show you some of what I'm talking about. All right, so this is just, I'm filming a deer run that I'm walking back along. It's close to one of the areas that I hunt. And I just wanted to show you, this is what I consider by like deer traffic. You get so many deer having to be funneled through the area due to the thick brush, and that they're frequently the same deer run so much that they're going to give you signs of this. First thing is just any of the sticks. The sticks are going to be snapped into smaller pieces. You're not going to have, there is still one long one here, but all your smaller sticks are going to be crushed down into pieces. So I'm just hit play and we'll walk along through here. And it's almost easily discernible where they're walking through. The brush doesn't grow up as much. Now here is a real interesting thing, and this is a good telltale sign of a well-used deer run. Right here along this edge, you can see where the pine needles themselves, there's almost like a ridge, a cliff where it drops down. The deer are walking along, and particularly because the tree forces them in the same area over and over again, they've worn the path down deeper, and you can see the old dried pine needles up top and just this line area here where they've crushed them down just from the frequent activity. As I play on a little further, so a really well-used deer area, a deer run, the pine needles are going to be worn down all the way through to the sand. The sand will start showing through just from the amount of activity that's going on in the same area. If you look off to the side, everything is covered in pine needles, but here You got the sand starting to come through on the deer run. Let's run this out and play it some more. You got your broken sticks. Here's a nice big area that's used very often. You can see the sand is just showing through just from the amount of deer activity that constantly gets it, and likely year round. So I hope that was some useful information for you all. It's just something I think maybe some people are overlooking, that you can really look at deer tracks and gather a lot more information from them. It's going to help you put your cameras in better locations and give you even more detailed information from that point. So something to consider. Hunting season's around the corner, and even in your postseason scouting, this is good tools to use. Good luck out there. Talk to you soon.